No, you don't understand. B2B needs to be boring. We're not selling, Cheetos. We're selling a software that has to, and it's complicated. So we have to explain all of these things. Like who said you didn't? You know what I mean? Like all we're saying is to achieve a balance of both. Your straightforward content, and then there's your conceptual content. Can you dashboard it shows and your funny commercials and your songs about your product, right? There's both. Like you have to achieve a balance of both. I feel like straightforward content helps you get what you're trying to communicate out there. It just get it out there, get the information out there. And then your conceptual content, it makes that message stick and more memorable and easier to recall in a relevant situation. Like what external people to work with, I would say you have to look at the type of content that they already make, one, and what they enjoy making, two, the type of content their audience expects from them, and then three, how your product or your brand could fit into that. I think the most important thing is just having a deep understanding of the people that your content is for and the people that consume your content. I talk to so many people that so many of people that have found me through my content, I'm really good friends with now. The problem is creativity comes in later on in the process, right? It's goals, objectives, and then tactics. Tactics is where creativity comes in. So we can't even talk about this before we've talked about the first two things.
So recently you talked about Netflix for B2B. I mean, if you want to share more about this, let's just talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the kind of thinking, so initially I have a friend, a colleague, Todd Clouser. He also makes content and stuff. So about 2-3 years ago, Todd and I have we co-founded a consultancy called Easy Mode. Through that consultancy, we co-host a podcast called Cheat Codes. So Todd and I would create a lot of content together. So one day we were creating the website for Easy Mode. We were just designing it. And we had this conversation we have so much content that we've created for LinkedIn. And just the way that LinkedIn works is you post content and then it kind of just, disappears into the void. Most you can do is just pin content and then hope people will go through it or whatever. So, but other than that, it kind of just disappears. So then I was talking to Todd and we were we've created so much content on LinkedIn that's kind of just disappeared. So why don't we just put it all on this website that we're creating for ourselves? Because we didn't have our own website at that point. So we were why don't we just take all of our content and then put it on this website so then people can just rewatch it all? So then we were okay, if we're going to do that to make it easier, why don't we just turn it into a streaming platform, in the sense that so he had a bunch of videos where he would sit in his backyard and just talk to the camera about marketing and stuff. And I had a bunch of videos, for example, where I was streaming myself playing video games while talking about marketing. So what we thought is why don't we just take content with common themes and then just turn it into a series. So for example, Todd, you have a bunch of videos where you're just sitting in the backyard. We can just take all those videos, turn them into episodes and name it Backyard Tales or whatever. And then we can take all of my videos where I'm just gaming, talking about marketing, turn them into episodes and call that series Level Up. And so that's how we initially got started. It wasn't just let's make a bunch of new series. It was let's just take all of this content that we already have and then make more use of it. Turn it into series by grouping them together based on whatever common themes they have, and then put them on our website under a page called content or whatever. And so we jumped into Photoshop or Figma, and we essentially just designed like a pretty much a copy of like Netflix's interface at that time. But we like replaced it with like our own series and thumbnails and stuff. And that never went anywhere. So we just came up with this like whole idea. It never went anywhere because we both worked like full-time jobs, and it was very hard to just like focus enough time to like design and develop our own website for side stuff. So that never went anywhere. But then in January of last year, he joined Lavender, and then in March of last year, I joined HockeyStack. So that framework that we created, we had made this framework called the Easy Mode framework. It was like an 8-part framework, and we essentially just implemented that framework at the companies that we joined. So he joined Lavender, implemented the framework there. I joined HockeyStack, implemented the framework there. And one of the biggest reasons I joined is their CRO and co-founder Amir, when he reached out to me, he was kind of just giving me like full creative reign on whatever I could do. So eventually I was like, oh, and I want to make a streaming platform, because I was thinking about like sort of that unfinished project that Todd and I had of making like that streaming platform for marketers. So when I was having this conversation with Amir months down the road, like I had that in my mind. And so I was like, you know, let me see if this guy will let me do it. And so when I told him that, he was like, go to hockeystack.com/theflow. And he was already like building towards something like that. It wasn't exactly like a streaming platform, but it was more than like a blog, right? Like a collection of blog or like a collection of webinars. So he was already building towards that. So that was like really cool. So I joined HockeyStack, built it there. And then the whole like, at first, the purpose behind it was just to create a collection of all of our existing content. That was just like, you know, we're like floating around on LinkedIn. That was the initial purpose of it, right? Like, why did we make, like, we know why we made all this content, but at that point, it sucks to have made all this content and like, it's on this platform that like we have zero control over, and like we can't even like organize how our like, you know, content shows up. It's not like you go to my profile and then you can see like folders or something, like Foursquare's like, hey, marketing skits, marketing songs, or whatever. Then you open it and then it shows you like all my content organized, right? So like you can't do that. So it just sucked to have had made all this content and it was just on this other platform. So the initial purpose was to just collect it in our own place, in our own website. But when I joined HockeyStack, there was no existing content. So then I had to think of like, how do I build this thing from scratch? And so that being like a very long story, in a nutshell, it consisted of just like a few things. Like we had like activating people within your company to create content, not necessarily other people on your marketing team, but like Amir, our CRO, he created a bunch of series, like shows. Our one and only salesperson at the time, Nate, he created our best product show. Our customer success person created shows. Even our CTO, like our technical co-founder, that's not involved in like marketing much or at all, right? Like even he created a series that went over like product-based updates and stuff. So like one, there's like activating internal people. Another thing was like influencers. I like to just refer to them as external creators, which are just content creators and subject matter experts from outside of your company. The whole influencer thought leadership thing, I just see that as more like, I don't know, like a state of being. Like either they have influence or they don't, or they're considered a thought leader or they're not, or they're working towards it. So I don't look at it as like thought leaders and influencers and content creators and subject matter experts. I think it's just content creators and subject matter experts, and either they have influence or they don't, blah, blah, blah. So like, I think the second thing after internal creators is like external creators, people from outside your company. But a lot of like, there's a lot of things I feel like you have to understand about that. Like one, you like, when you're choosing like who to work with, like what external people to work with, I would say you have to like look at the type of content that they already make, one, and what they enjoy making, two, like the type of content their audience expects from them, and then three, like how your product or your brand could fit into that, right? Because that solves the main issues that you have with trying to translate B2C influencer marketing over to B2B, right? Like where we just like, we hire a creator, they write like a sponsored post or something, and like maybe it leads to a spike in signups, maybe it doesn't, right? But like that way does not necessarily work in my opinion. Like I don't, sure there are people that it works for. I talk to marketers all the time, and I know like companies that like direct response influencer marketing is working for, but I still think that should be like a longer play where you use external creators to communicate whatever messages you may have. So the issues that we run into is like, one, the type of content their audience expects from them, right? Like I've seen marketers or salespeople that have a following, but let's say, for example, that they've built their following through talking about like more personal things, right? So like that's how their followers or the people that follow their content like relate to them. But then when that person comes out and does like a sponsored post, like that post may not perform as well because one, it's not the type of content that they're used to making. And two, most importantly, it's not the type of content like their audience expects from them. So one, I would say I kind of abandoned this approach altogether. Mm-hmm. My whole like sort of perspective on it was like, we need to create content. Like content is pretty much everything in the sense that like you have like, how are you going to communicate the value of your product to your market? Through content. How are you going to enable sales to have better conversations? Through content. How are you going to build brand awareness, brand admiration, create demand, blah, 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 all of these things? Like it's all through content. So like one, like I already understood like joining HockeyStack, like I have a long road ahead of me in the sense that I have to create a buttload of content. So right from there, it's like you have to get very strategic with it. And the way that you get strategic with it is figuring out like, okay, what are the main things that I need to communicate, right? For example, and it's like one, okay, no one really knows about the product. So I know I need to create like product-based content. Like I need to just communicate all of this product related info to my market, how it works, who's it for, how it helps on the day to day, what are the features, what are the different features do. Like, so there's just a bunch of like subtopics there, right? That I know I need to create content around. But then there's also like, okay, us specifically in terms of HockeyStack, it's an attribution tool. And every marketer in the world has a strong opinion on attribution, whether it's like for or against, right? So like one, that, and then two, the tool itself it goes beyond what we traditionally look at as attribution. Like it goes beyond the whole first touch, last touch, all that stuff, and tries to paint it as better understanding your customer journey, right? So in that sense, because one, attribution is a topic that marketers feel strongly about, and two, because the product is actually doing something different, I felt there needed to be a narrative at play. I don't think like a strategic narrative, would be relevant or helpful for every SaaS company, right? Like if you're just, like, I don't want to like poop on project management tools, but like if you're a project management tool, you don't really need like a narrative. You just need to like be a better brand, communicate your features better, these types of things, have a better sales process, better customer success, all that stuff, right? It's not necessarily a strategic narrative that's the missing piece. But with a company or a product like HockeyStack, one, I knew I needed to make a bunch of product-based content, and then two, like there needed to be content around like this topic of attribution to get just ultimately to get people from thinking about attribution as first touch, last touch, linear, blah, 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 to, hey, no, it all collectively works together to impact goals. And our job is to identify as much as we can about how prospects turn into customers. In a nutshell, like narrative content just based around all of this. That was broken down into a bunch of subtopics. And then the last thing was, I believe that, like, for example, let's say like demand generation, it's creating demand around your product or your services. But I feel like brand building, it's creating demand around your company, irrespective of your product or your services. So like with that mindset, I knew that there needed to just be content based on building brand awareness, association, and admiration. Essentially these three things. Like people not only need to know like what HockeyStack is, but they need to know what it does in the sense that they need to associate it with a specific outcome. Because as we all know, only, like 5% of people are in market. What about the out of market? And I feel like that's where this comes in. But I also feel like where most brand initiatives or efforts targeted towards out of market buyers fail is because of that, is because they don't associate the product with a specific outcome. They're kind of just like clever and, going viral and stuff like that. But even when we would make like funny content, it would associate, like that's one of the things that I would do. Whenever we had a new feature release, for example, I created a skit series specifically for product releases, product updates, and new features. It was called like B2B Therapy. And it was just like a TikTok style skit where I was pretending to be a marketer talking to his therapist. And I would just I always had like two non-related problems that I would complain about. Like in one of the first episodes, I complained about like being bullied by sales. And then the therapist was like, it's okay, the sales team can't hurt you anymore, right? And like stuff like that. And then I would finally like complain about something that was a result of not having that feature. So like we released a feature where you could see podcast mentions in your customer journey if you integrated Gong. And if someone mentioned your podcast, like HockeyStack would pull that, throw it in your customer journey as a touch point, right? So like we released like a little hype video, as you should, but to sort of get it to stick and get it out there, I made a new episode of B2B Therapy where I was just complaining about things. And then I eventually complained about like leadership team wanting to shut down my podcast because I couldn't show ROI for it after 2 weeks. And then the therapist was like, well, don't worry, you have HockeyStack now. And, now you can see podcast mentions in your customer journey. And then like it would end. And at the end of the video, I just took a picture of like the clouds and I would do this voiceover where I'm like, HockeyStack, helping marketers since 1873. Now with podcast mentions in the customer journey. And that was like the last thing that you would hear in the video. So like it was hopefully a funny skit, you laughed, blah blah blah. These videos, like these skits would do well on LinkedIn, but you'd leave knowing with the fact that okay, HockeyStack now has a new feature that does so and so. And so that was the brand building type of content that I made. There was like an 80-20% split. With like
so,
our
I have quite a few questions actually over here. So I just want to understand, you're building this massive content engine, okay, and you're utilizing the internal resources. So I just want to, so maybe you have this amazing ability to be creative, come up with those funny ideas, and you can shoot it yourself and you can build those videos and do all of those. But you involve the other people within the company. They might or might not have the personality of doing that. So how would you that is one part. And then how do you enforce the cadence? Was there a cadence? Okay, this many to be done this week by this guy, this guy, this guy. So how was that content engine working internally, like in terms of like a real machine?
Yeah. So first, like with internal people, and that's a huge part of it, right? Like you have to understand, like these are not people that one, they may or may not used to be, more likely or not used to be creating content, but it's also not a part of their like core job responsibilities. Like they don't get graded on this, like, you know what I mean? So like this is just something that they're doing to help you out with your marketing efforts. So like one, I would say having strong internal relationships, like that's very important. Like I was buddies with everyone at the company, right? So that made it a lot easier. And so to get them going. Two, once you've identified the right people, because another thing I'll mention is that there's a difference between people that want to do it and that people that are actually getting started. Because like even people that really, really want to do it, like they may still procrastinate due to like inner human insecurities that we all have, right? Like there's so much that goes involved into taking that leap from just not putting yourself out there to like putting yourself out there. So like identifying the right people. And then from there, like you have to make it easy for them, right? Like even as like marketers, as creators, like we can get stuck on like, what should I make next? If you don't have like a good process for ideation, it's easy to get stuck or writer's block or whatever the case may be. So think of like your head of sales, like he or she, like you can't expect them to just like, come out with like a full blown framework for, hey, here's how I'm going to create my next 20 posts or whatever. So like you have to facilitate it, make it easier for them. One of the easiest ways that I found is to just like get them on a Zoom call and, like let them know beforehand, send them like 4 or 5 questions, be like, hey, these are questions. I'm just going to ask you these questions. You think of your answers and let me know what you think. Right. And then 2, 3 days, 4 days later, according to their schedule, you jump on a call. You ask them those questions. You get them to say their answers. You're recording the whole time. When you're done with a 45-minute call, I was usually able to get like 7 or 8 little clips out of it. Now you just gave them 7 or 8 clips. If you could go one step further and even like just take whatever they talked about in that micro clip, turn it into a nice text post because you're used to writing this type of stuff, give it to them. They could edit it, review it, change up whatever they like. And then now they have like 8 posts ready to go. So at least now you've gotten them started. So like you have to come with the processes and the frameworks and stuff like that to be able to like ideate content for them, extract content from them, and then also like knowing going into this that the stuff that you're getting from them needs to be purposeful in the sense that it's impacting one of your bigger objectives or your goals. That's why like I always start with like goals, objectives, and tactics. Like what are the major 3 or 4 company goals? Like what are we trying to accomplish this year or this quarter or this whatever? Like what are the major company goals? Then I take each of those goals, break them down into objectives. Like, okay, in order for us to actually accomplish this goal, these 4 or 5 things would need to happen. And if we did these 4 or 5 things, we would then actually accomplish this goal. So then I take each of those objectives and then break them down into a list of like actual tactics. Like, okay, what are the actual things we would need to do to make this one thing happen? And if we can make these 5 things happen, we can accomplish this goal. So like everything, every single piece of content we made, we had our goals, objectives, and tactics. And then we had a strategic narrative that we turned into a list of subtopics. So the topics of our content, they didn't come from like keyword research or what competitors are doing or trends, or things like that. They all stemmed from our narrative. So we had established purposes behind the content that we're creating. We know what we're trying to accomplish with all of this content. We know what we need to communicate to our market. We have a narrative that goes over all of these things and it's broken down into dozens and dozens of subtopics. And then we also know that we need to create product content, narrative content, brand content, and we're going to do it through internal and external creators. So when I would get external creators, for example, I think, going back to your second question now, where you said like, what is the cadence and how does it all work together? So like so when we worked with Todd Clouser, Tim Davidson, Camille Trent, Jay Desai, Natalie, there was so many people. But when we were creating the shows, like, what are they going to create? It always started with like, what are we hoping to accomplish here? Like, what is the bigger like goal this is tying back to? What objective is this trying to impact? So it would always start with there. And then we would decide like, what type of show is this? Is this going to be a product-based show? Is it going to be a, narrative-based show? Is it going to be a brand-based show? Like we then consider that. And then so for example, with like Todd and Tim, we made brand-based shows. For Todd, we created a character, or he had already from before created a character called the worst marketer in the world a few years ago when we were at Refine Labs. It was just this thing that he used to do, like TikTok content he used to make. But then he stopped for like the longest time, for like a year and a half, 2 years. Like there was no new worst marketer in the world content. And randomly one day, and he used to do like TikTok style skits, vertical videos. But randomly one day I was like, dude, do you want to bring back the worst marketer in the world as a flow series? But we'll like film it like 4K camera and like landscape and just make it like so much better. And we brought it back. And so the way that we started creating those episodes is he would take subtopics from our strategic narrative. And because he's the worst marketer in the world, he would just talk about doing the opposite. And so like, then it's kind of like, as you watch this, like it's understood, like if this guy who's horrible at his job and is proud of it is saying that I should do this thing, then I should probably do the opposite, which was then like just something stemming from our narrative. So like, that's how we would create that show. And so with all of our external creators, we just made these shows because at one point, and the ultimate goal in terms of cadence was to build towards thinking of it as like a TV channel, right? Like if you pull up the TV guide, you look at HBO and it just has like this schedule. It was more so thinking of the Flow series and their distribution, more specifically the cadence of the distribution. It was more so trying to think of it like that. So for example, we had Can You Dashboard It, which was a product-based show. We had The Worst Marketer in the World, which was a brand show. B2B Ross, which was a brand show. Level Up. So we had all of these shows, right? The ultimate goal was to work towards 10 shows. So that way we could alternate bi-weekly. So like the first Monday of the month would be like Worst Marketer in the World comes out, new episode. The second Monday of the month would be like new episode of B2B Ross comes out. And then the third Monday of the month would be Worst Marketer. Fourth Monday of the month would be B2B Ross. So like B2B Ross and Worst Marketer episodes would alternate every Monday. And then like Level Up episodes and Can You Dashboard episodes would alternate every Tuesday. So like that was the ultimate goal. We were like, dude, if we can just get to that point where we have 10 shows and this is how they're coming out, like that's sick. So in terms of cadence, we were just trying to build towards that. So like in the beginning, it was like when we didn't have as many shows, right? You got to build towards 10 shows. So in the beginning, when we had like, let's say like 4 or 5 shows, we were doing like weekly episodes. So B2B Ross would be every Tuesday. The Worst Marketer in the World was every Wednesday. Level Up was every Thursday. Stuff like that. And then as we started creating more shows, we were able to move them to bi-weekly. Because then we also just started feeling like it would be nice to have some space in between them. So maybe, people kind of start like missing the character, so to speak. Right. So like, yeah, we would just really think about it that way. But in terms of creating the actual shows, it was always this like like just underlying strategic thinking behind it. Like, what is it impacting? What is it, like going towards? It wasn't just like, hey, let's just create a bunch of funny, awesome shows or whatever. Right. So, and I think collectively, that's how all of these shows working together and all of the like content that I was making on the side, I think all of this stuff sort of just bombarding the industry for like 7 months it was very consistent. That's what collectively had the impact that it did with like HockeyStack growing the way that it did. You can't single out like any one thing. You know what I mean? Like it's a great product. We had great marketing, great customer success, great sales process. So like, I think in terms of the great marketing part, like that's everything that I just talked about. Right.
Okay.
But just to like point out, like it's not alone. Like you to have that kind of growth, there's still the sales, customer success, product side.
Okay. So in terms of funnel, seems like this is more of the top of funnel awareness that you're creating uh,
Hmm.
and distributing it, and then based upon that awareness, all of the people are going to your website, and then they sort of like fall into the funnel and go down and stuff like that. So am I right about this?
Yeah. Yeah. And, our website was a big part of it, optimizing it, getting the positioning right, then translating that into like messaging, good messaging that communicates what we do. And it's a very complicated, not complicated, but it's so deep in what it does, its capabilities and its functionalities. Like it's so deep. And so knowing how to unravel that through your website, right? Like knowing how to like unravel this flow of information so it's all easy to consume. You're not just bombarding them with stuff. So like the website was a huge part of it. HockeyStack also has a really good live demo that if you go to our homepage, it's like right there, you click the live demo, and then you can just you could just start going through the product HockeyStack. It's like dummy numbers and all that stuff, but in terms of the actual product, like it's all there. You could start going through it and all that stuff. So the live demo is huge. And through the tool, and it always kind of just, I guess it sucks a little bit for me to talk about like the funnel aspect and like the performance of the content aspect, because like we just use HockeyStack, and like I don't want it to sound like one big product pitch, but like that's it's a very sick like for starters, I don't work there anymore, right? So like I haven't been there for over a month now, but in terms of the product, like it's an insane product. I still feel like to this day, like every B2B marketing team in the world should be using it. So like in terms of the funnel, there's a feature if a company meets a certain criteria or a set of variables, like they've seen our live demo, they've checked out our series on the flow, they've seen our sales page, they've checked out our narrative blog. If they meet like this set of variables, then it just sends a Slack notification to our sales guy, and then he's able to reach out to them, and it's very like warm lead. It's not totally like cold outbound or anything, because we know how deep their interaction with our brand has been. So like and then other than that, like people just get in touch. So it was the top of funnel, we had all of this stuff, but then again, we were also making like product-based content, straightforward and conceptual content directly related to features, directly related to our narrative. We were, there was a part that we were also like, if you think of Can You Dashboard It, for example, right? Like Can You Dashboard It? It was a show where like we just got suggestions from our audience on things they found difficult to track and measure. And then Nate, the sales dude, would just use HockeyStack's dashboard builder to create a report tracking that exact thing. So like that was one of our biggest drivers of pipeline in terms of like, if you want to single something out, that show, Can You Dashboard It? It was a very good conceptual product-based show. So our content touched everything, like it did. Content was what drove everything. And so there was a ton of demand. We would get a ton of inbound. And yeah, like Nate was great at what he did. And so he kind of took it from there. I would listen to customer calls. more so I would listen to demo calls and calls with prospects than I would listen to customer calls, because then that would help inform, like, I know everyone says like you should listen to customers and base everything off that, which I totally agree with. I talk to customers too, but in terms of informing content and what to make, like, you learn more from actually qualified, serious prospects than you learn from customers, because the customers are at a different point now, right? Like they're at a different, they're just at a different state of being. They don't have those problems anymore. They're not facing it anymore. Now they're looking at, I think where customer insights comes in is like, how do we improve the product? How do we improve the sales process? Because these people just went through it, right? Like there's so much where that helps. And, you know, product roadmap, vision, all of those things. But I think calls with like actual, or those same customers when they were at the prospect stage, listening to their demo calls, right? Like at this stage, like that's what really helps sort of learn, like, what should I be talking about? You know, what angle should I be coming from and things like that. So I think the content, everything we created, it touched the full funnel, and then going back to that as the marketing team, and it's kind of just a cycle. Like now you're learning from that, and then you're kind of just all of those things I said before about purpose and strategy and narrative, like that's just in your brain. You're already going to think that way moving forward. But when you're in the day to day, like let's say I want to create like a LinkedIn text post tomorrow, like I know, like, you know, topic XYZ has been a very like recurring conversation in the past like 45 days. And, you know, 63% of people have talked about it on their first call. So like that could let me know, like I could just drop a LinkedIn video about this today. Right. And so, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
A lot. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. So in terms of like, so you're building a lot of content, and how would you rate this, a certain content doing better? What the KPIs which you're looking at? Okay, this one is doing better and this wasn't, and so you can create more of those and something like that. So what was your like what are your KPIs for the top of funnel content?
Well, it's hard to say in terms of like singling something out, right? Like, so like we just as a company, as a team, like operate with the mindset that like the things that we're doing, because they're based in such sound strategy, the things that we're doing are collectively working together to help us towards our goals. Because one, like, again, like everything that we do ultimately comes back to a goal or an objective. Like, why are we doing this? And that goal or objective is a major company goal. It's not like the marketing department's goal or like the sales team's goal. It's like the major company goals. And so literally every single thing that we're doing is created to impact one of those goals. So we have this understanding that like everything is working together to reach us towards our goal. So one, it's hard to single any one thing out. Like that like defeats the purpose of like the way that we're approaching this thing in the first place. So in terms of KPIs, it was more just like increments and base growth across the board on different things, right? Like month one, we're getting, 100 unique visitors to the flow, let's say to speak, right? Like month two, now we're getting 150. So like, we're just looking at base growth, like increments and base. And because I believe when you do it this way, like you don't really see spikes. Like spikes of growth come from like, I don't know, like you're running like a 20% off campaign or whatever, or you got corporate bro and you paid him $30,000 or whatever to make an amazing funny video about you, and it reached millions of his followers and you got a spike there. So like that's when you see spikes of growth, when you kind of just do these like one time or like big things. But like other than that, if you're talking about like a very sound long-term strategic play that takes the short and midterm into account, then what you're really seeing is just like gradual growth over time, just like steady base growth over time rather than like spikes or any increments. So our KPIs and stuff were just based on that, like, you know, and we're gradually increasing the amount of shows we're making. We're gradually increasing, you know, the amount of like LinkedIn followers we're getting on our company page per month. We're gradually increasing, you know, the amount of qualified leads per month, and, you know, like how many people are turning into like actual open deals. So it was just like a base increase in across the board on several different variables in terms of just like how we track our growth. And more specifically, since KPIs are really just helping you understand how close you are to achieving your goals, it would just be based off of our objectives, right? So like if we had a goal, if one of our goals was like go from, you know, 0 to 10 million ARR in a year, right? Like the objectives were then broken down in how to do that. And then each objective was then broken down into like a list of tactics. So then the KPIs were just more so tracking the progress of these objectives, right? Like how well are we progressing on making these things happen in order to accomplish these major goals. So yeah, it was, you know, it was all just a bit different, right? Like from the beginning, we were thinking of things differently with the streaming platform and these different purposes and the narrative and all this stuff. So when it came to tracking it, it was also very like just different. And so essentially that's what we saw. We saw a gradual increase in, on one hand, we had a gradual increase in output, a gradual increase in just like the amount of shows we were making, the amount of people that we're doing. So now we're reaching, you know, their audiences. So we're now reaching more like secondhand audiences, so to speak. So one thing, there was like everything that we're doing, we just gradually increased it over time. Not even gradually, I would say rapidly increased it over time. We moved really, really fast. And on the other hand, that output led to outcomes. And so like, because of that rapid increase in output, we saw a rapid increase in outcomes. Our, you know, demos exploded, demand exploded, the people talking about HockeyStack exploded, you know, like, so there was a direct correlation between how fast we were moving and how rapidly we were creating things and putting things out, and how quick that growth or that ascension was. Mm-hmm. And not to mention, I think one last important thing I'll say is that I didn't have a massive following before this, but one thing that obviously really helped is having like, if I have like 15,000 followers on LinkedIn, I would say like 90% of them are like SaaS marketers, VPs, CMOs, founders, heads of demand gen, heads of content, heads of brand. So that's at least like 10,000, 11,000 people seeing every single thing that I'm putting out over like 9 months. So like some sort of an existing following is like helpful. If you're starting from scratch, then, you know, for sure, like you can still do it. It will just take longer. So I don't want this to seem like, you know, Emir has a pretty decent following too. Nate, our sales guy, has a decent following too. We've all been active on LinkedIn for the past couple of years. You know what I mean? That's where our target market, ICP, hangs out. The people that we were working with, Todd, Tim, all of these people, they have a pretty substantial following too. Pretty, you know, 90%, 95% just SaaS marketers and SaaS leadership and stuff. So like, that's the big thing. Like, we don't have like 50,000, 60,000, 100,000 followers, but it's like the ones that are there, the 10, 20K, 25K, like it's all just people in SaaS. And so it's like being at an industry event every single day, being able to just put your content in front of, you know, like 20% of them or 15% of them or whatever. So like, that was a huge, that helped. big time, massively. So
okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's great. So okay, so obviously LinkedIn has been your sort of like main play, and can you please tell viewers more about what worked for the LinkedIn algo? Like, what tactics would you sort of like recommend people? Okay, if you do this, this will work for you. And lately, we're also seeing LinkedIn organic reach just going away. So what's going on over there? So maybe some tips and insights over there.
Yeah. I don't really, I'm not a this is, I mean, I guess like the way that I create content, like I don't really consider those types of things. Like I don't consider hooks and, oh, the first 3 seconds has to catch their attention. I'm just like, it's not that I don't care, but I have a very, really good understanding of the people that watch my content and the people that like consume my content. Right. So like, I just go based off that. Like people would like, for example, like for the past couple of weeks, I was just experimenting with posting literally just like dumb stuff in like the middle of the night. And I just wanted to see. I used to care so much about like, no, like 2-3 years ago, it's like, oh, I have to post at 10 a.m. every day and I can't post on Fridays. But like, as I've grown, like I've stopped caring even more about those things. So I wanted to experiment with just like one time I logged on LinkedIn at like 10:30. And like, this is, a few weeks ago, I'm looking for a full-time role and stuff. And then LinkedIn presents you with that prompt, like, hi, Obaid, are you hiring? And then I just thought to myself, like, what you mean, fool? I'm like, I'm unemployed as shit, right? Like, so I just laughed to myself. So I just took a screenshot of it. And then I just made that a LinkedIn post at like 10:30 at night. And the post was just a screenshot that said, am I hiring? ? I'm unemployed AF guy. And like, it got like 200 likes by the time I woke up the next morning. And so like, that would kind of go against like what you would think of in terms of just like, no, you have to do this way and that way. I think the most important thing is just like having a deep understanding of the people that your content is for and the people that consume your content. Like I talk to so many people that like so many of people that have found me through my content, I'm like really good friends with now. You know what I mean? So like, I understand that. Like, I know I can cuss. I know I can drop F-bombs left and right and like no one's going to care. And an important thing is I've also been like that from the start, right? Like I made it a point to where like, if you're going to follow me, like, you know what you're getting into, right? Like I'm not going to like suit and tie up for you and stuff and be like, hello, sir. Nice to, like, it's just like, hey, like we're just regular. Like if we really believe if B2B is human and people marketing to other people, if we really believe that, then we would drop the corporate veil, as I like to call it, the charades, right? So I've been like that from the start and people like it. They don't mind, like I talk to them and that's just how it is. Like if we met somewhere right now at a restaurant, like the way that I would talk to you as just like a normal person is how I am in like all of my videos and all of my stuff. So I don't really focus much on like tactics or trends or like posting a specific way. I just know my audience really well. And from the beginning, I've always kind of just talked about the things that I'm interested in. If you look at all of my content, all it really is me like theorizing, like communicating, like, hey, I think this could work and this process and this framework and this whatever idea, and then me experimenting with it at like HockeyStack with like the streaming platform stuff, right? And then me just like telling everyone what I learned about it and like how they could potentially emulate it as well. So like from the beginning, that's really all I've done. It's just like theories and ideas and themes and concepts, and then applying those things and then letting you know like what came of it. And so I've always just stuck to that. And even I remember like 4 years ago, and I'm talking about like the demand gen SaaS crowd. I remember like when the content that we were putting out, we were so heavily focused on like short attention spans, like micro content. And, you know, LinkedIn videos, they were like 10, 30 seconds. Like the only people that were putting out like 9-minute videos at that time were like me and Chris Walker. That's it. Like everyone else was so focused on like shorter content, micro videos, like whatever, I don't care. And like, even like my friends, like my content creator peers would be like, I would send it to them, and like you see a 9-minute video pop up in Slack with a bet saying like, what do you think about this? And they'd just be like, dude, what the hell, man? Like no one's going to watch this 9-minute video. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, you're right. I'll shorten it. But then I wouldn't. And I'd just post it. And it would get like 200 likes and like 3,000 minutes of like play time and 15, 20, 30, 40,000 impressions. And that would just sort of like solidify this notion that like, I don't need to worry about like hacking attention or something like that. I just need to continue doing what I've been doing, knowing that like, this is the type of stuff that my audience is looking for. And I just continue to do that. And as a creator, I have a desire to consistently improve over time. So that's really the things that I'm focused on, right? Like doing what I do, knowing that's what my audience likes, and then just trying to get better at every little aspect of it over time, like to make the video look better, lighting better, video scripts that I write are more concise. Maybe the music is better. Maybe now, okay, let's add something into it, you know, so let's go outside into the mountains. Let's film drone footage. You know that's what I'm trying to like, that's where I'm at now. I feel like I've got the substance and all of that stuff down. Now what I'm trying to learn more about is like, just like the cinematic aspect of it. Like, you know, the cinematography, lighting, you know, getting good shots from your camera, inside, outside. Eventually when I get that down, I'm going to try to figure out like drone footage and how to work that into like B2B marketing, LinkedIn content. So like, that's just, you know, my journey as a creator. I've never really focused on or cared about, you know, because the algorithm is a fickle beast, right? Like that's, you don't want to like detach yourself from that, right? Because with that comes like, oh, like one day, like the algorithm could just suck. And then you're like, oh, my content's shit. And now you're going hard on yourself for an absolutely no reason. So like detach yourself from that, detach yourself from the algorithm. And, you know, XYZ famous LinkedIn creator with 1 million followers said I should do this. Like just experiment. That's really all you can do. Try a bunch of different things. When I first started on LinkedIn, I would just try everything. Let's try twice a day. Let's try posting at this time. Let's try posting at this time. Let's try posting memes. Let's post on a Sunday. Let's post on a Saturday. Let's post on a Friday night. So like, just have like a 6-month phase of like experimentation, and then like stop, sit back, look at those past 6 months, see what you learned, what can you pull from it, and what can you move forward with. That's how I came up with my content. I just had like a 2-month period of experimentation, like 2.5, 3 years ago, where I just made a bunch of different type of content. I made marketing skits. I made rap songs about marketing. I made video game content about marketing. I just made a bunch of stuff. And then after that 2 months, I was like, okay, the skits did well. The songs did well. The strategic talking head videos did well, and the gaming videos did well. So those are the 4 things I'm just going to move forward with. And I just did those things. And so, yeah. And then, you know, just really just talk to your people, like talk to the people that follow you. Like I've also been mindful about that. Like for example, there have been a few times where, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, when Midjourney was first becoming a thing, right? I thought it was insane. Like, holy crap. So like, I remember Chris Do was posting about it. Like, he was like the first person to start posting about Midjourney. And so just watching Chris Do's content before it was even like a big thing, I tried to use it. I used it, came up with some good images, wrote a post about it, shared some of my pictures, and then shared like 17 steps on how to get started with Midjourney. And that post like blew up. It had like 600,000 impressions, like 3,000 views. And I hated it because like the followers that it would get me, like the people that started following me, I realized like, shit, I don't have nothing for you after this post. You know what I mean? So like, I would just like, senior graphic designer, or like, and then because of that nature of content, like, it's Midjourney, it's AI, it's just this entirely new phenomenon. So like, project manager, legal aid at so-and-so law firm. And like, these were the type of people that began following me, as opposed to before, when it was like head of demand gen, VP of marketing, co-founder of this Series C SaaS company, right? So like, I was like, damn, like, I don't have nothing for you after this. So like, that's one reason I purposely avoid sharing like those types of posts. Like, I've done it like 4 or 5 times where I've just, one time, I don't want to say the name, but a LinkedIn creator, like on a Friday, this was like 2-3 years ago, posted something like, skip the Netflix this weekend, and like all of this bull crap. It was just like, you should be taking a course and level up. And like, this was like 2-3 years ago, maybe even 4. So like, I got so annoyed at reading that post, and like, I immediately just like wrote my own post, like, hey, reminder before the weekend, like, watch Netflix, do whatever the hell you want, chill out, like, you don't always got to be on, blah blah blah, like just one of those like motivational type posts. And like, it blew up. And then like, all the comments were just like random people like, I really needed this, thank you for this motivation. And I was like, oh, like, I'm the last person you should be getting motivation from right now. And so like, that's when I would realize like, I kind of hate those posts. Like, I kind of hate doing those like random off topic posts that just like blow up. And now you've kind of just like polluted this, this like intentional like audience that you were building. Right. So like, that's why I much prefer slow and steady growth. I've gone from like 0 to like almost 15K followers in like, I don't know, 2-3 years, however long I think it was in 2022 2022 when I started taking like LinkedIn content seriously. So I've gone from 0 to almost 15K in like 2 years. I could have done like, the 0 to 80K in 10 months. Like, I know what it takes to do that. I can post a selfie of myself drinking coffee and post, tell you to have a blessed day and hope, the sun shines over your house and blah, 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 blah. I could do that too. Like, but it just sucks. Like, I don't want to do that. I also, not to knock that, I'm not pooping on that approach. I think it works if you're like an individual solo creator trying to sell like a course or something like that, consultation. That type of broad reach content helps, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to reach a wider net, like a group of people that would be interested in, let's say, like, especially like LinkedIn. Like, if you're a LinkedIn person selling how to get better on LinkedIn, like, dude, yes, post the most generic shit you can, because like every single person that's taking LinkedIn seriously could benefit from what it may be that you have to teach. So like, I know I kind of poop on that type of content, and I know a lot of other people do too, but like, that's why they do it. Like, they have a potential audience of like millions of people on LinkedIn. So they're just posting this generic content, wider reach. It doesn't, but me, I'm a SaaS marketer trying to drive pipeline and revenue growth for my company. So like, that's why I don't do that, because it's not going to help me, in my opinion.
Okay. So we had Chris Vogue on our podcast also, and
Nice.
similar
That's
to you,
awesome.
yeah. So similar to your opinion, so I think you both of you guys claim that entertainment can drive revenue. So I mean, uh, so tell, if somebody has to go to board and convince, okay, that this is what how we are going to do it, this is how we're going to build a content machine. How would you convince and tell those people to, okay, come along, and this is the ROI of this thing? So what are your thoughts about that?
Hmm. Well, I mean, it's a pretty loaded conversation, I believe. I think there's a lot that goes into it, but one thing I would say is that, like with anything else, like you have to like, there's a balance, right? Like, marketers have this like knack for doing the whole this versus that thing, SEO versus PPC, and you know outbound versus inbound, and good web design versus good web copy, and it goes on and on. Like, we've always like pit things against one another, whereas like the answer is always like freaking both. Like, what do you mean, like a balance? Like, why are we talking about good design versus good web copy? Like, let's do both, guys. And so um I think when it comes to the entertainment aspect, it's just, that's usually from people that are on the fence, or from the people that are on the outside looking in. This is usually their first, like, like when I see like people on LinkedIn, right? In the early days, like before HockeyStack, right? When it was just the theory days, just B2B marketing shouldn't be boring and this and that. The main complaint that I would hear uh is like, oh, it was always pitting entertaining content against informative content. That was the argument, was always just rooted in this. It was just like, then, no, you don't understand. B2B needs to be boring. We're not selling, Cheetos. We're selling a software that has to, it's complicated. So we have to explain all of these things. Like, no shit, man. Like, who said you didn't? You know what I mean? Like, all we're saying is to achieve a balance of both, right? Like, when, for example, when I talk about content, I gave a presentation at Golden Hour 2 weeks ago on creating a collection of shows, right? One of the parts was about the nature of content. Before we get into anything, we're talking about the nature of your content. And to simplify it, there's straightforward content that is just, you're just presenting your insights. Think of like your blog posts, your podcast episodes, your LinkedIn text posts, your talking head posts. There's that, your straightforward content. And then there's your conceptual content. Your can you dashboard it shows, and your funny commercials, and your songs about your product, right? There's both. Like, you have to achieve a balance of both. To further simplify it even more, I feel like straightforward content helps you get what you're trying to communicate out there. It just get it out there, get the information out there. And then your conceptual content, it makes that message stick and more memorable and easier to recall in a relevant situation. If we go back to the example of like that podcast feature, as I said, like, we made a normal hype video for it. Like, hey, new feature. Like, that's the straightforward content. Like, let's get this information out there. But then I also made like funny skits around it that made that information more memorable and easier to recall down the line when someone gets stuck in a situation about trying to prove podcast ROI, for example. They'll be like, oh yeah, that one thing I saw. And that's even before they go to search and look for anything and stuff like that. So, I forgot what question I was answering, but okay. So the board, right? So again, like, it's a balance. So I think, in my experience, I've gone through this conversation plenty of times now. through consultation and stuff like that. And it just comes down to a very solid game plan, right? Like if you think of the easy mode framework, for example, it's an 8-part framework. It's mindset, purpose, strategy, ideation, creation, distribution, performance, and iteration, right? So like it goes through everything. So if you're building a game plan to present to the board or present to your CEO, you got to give them the big picture. It's just like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How is this going to help type stuff, right? Like that's the conversation. So like I would start with like, hey, here are our goals. Here are the things we need to do to accomplish our goals. Here are the actual things that we need to carry out, the actual tasks we need to carry out to accomplish our objectives. Here's how we're going to do these things, right? And then like that gives you an overview of like, okay, we're going to have straightforward product-based content, but we're also going to have conceptual product-based content. You don't even got to go into all of that, right? Like, hey, I'm going to make a funny skit. They don't care about that. It's like, what is the purpose of this? What are we doing? What does it tie back to? What am I going to get out of this? So that's how I would present that to the board. It's less so about like, let's do something entertaining, because that's a very small part of it. That just comes in on the actual like content you're making. And then the bigger picture would just be like, hey, here are our goals. Here's what we need to do to accomplish these goals. Here's the timeline that I think I can accomplish this in. And this is what I need. And here are the different responsibilities of everyone involved. If we can all just play our part and do our thing, we're good. And I've never had, when I've presented a plan in this format, so to speak, I've never had anyone be like, no. You know what I mean? Like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, it just makes too much sense. And like, that's up to you as the marketer or the marketing leader to make your plan make too much sense for them to be like, no, we're not going to do this. Right. So I think it's all that. Like if you start with company goals, the problem is creativity comes in later on in the process, right? It's goals, objectives, and then tactics. Tactics is where creativity comes in. So we can't even talk about this before we've talked about the first two things. I think ultimately that's what it is. And the way, you know, content marketers, the way that a lot of us are today is we're tactics first, right? Like we know that we have to create a blog for some reason. So we're just going to create a blog. And now we're SEO, keyword research, blah, 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 blah. We know we need to create a podcast. So now we're just creating a like we're just tactics first. Like we just jump into the tactics for the most part, where it's like that. And then that's where entertainment, creativity, ideas, all that stuff comes in. So then that's why our entertainment, creativity, ideas are also limited, because ultimately what we're doing is we're just trying to create things for the sake of creating things because we know we have to create them to increase search traffic or whatever. Right. So like, but if it's a lot more fun when you just start with the goals, because then you kind of just have like this blank slate of like, this is the stuff that I need to do using all of my experience and knowledge and know-how and creativity. How can I do these things? Or how are we going to do these things? Like that's where it gets fun. That's where like the mental gymnastics comes in, and you really have to use all of your knowledge and experience as a marketer to like make these things happen, as opposed to just like jumping in and someone just telling you to write blog posts, you know, all day. So I think the whole goals, objective, tactics thing is very important. And whether you're presenting to the board, whether you're planning a marketing strategy, you know, whether you're planning a go-to market strategy, I think that's very important. Just company goals broken down into objectives, those objectives all broken down into the actual activities or tasks you'll need to carry out to accomplish those objectives. And I mean, that's it. I feel like that's the answer for a lot of things. I feel like that a lack of that is why we have like siloed departments, and, you know, like success for one team may not mean success for the other team or things like that. Like that's why we have all of these like issues, because we're not approaching it that way, I think.
So this infotainment for marketing, I asked the same question to Chris also. So how do you master this? Because he went to improv, he does improv and all of that. So how do you master it?
I don't know. It's a very hard question, man. I feel like, there, like, someone like Travis Tyler would tell you go to, like comedy. I think it was improv, like him go to improv classes, and I agree. And like, and I think, even someone like Travis, who I feel like might have been a funny kid like me growing up, like I've kind of just always leaned to that. Like I've kind of just always been the class clown, the funny kid. Obviously we grew up in an era. I was like 13 years old when like the Chappelle Show and stuff came out. So like that very much like formed my like comedic brain, like the Will Ferrells and the Jim Carreys. Like I was like 9, 10 years old in the midst of, the golden era of that type of comedy. So like my brain was just formed on like those types of people. And yeah, like I've just always like I act very silly with my kids and stuff. And so there's that, like I'm on, just the whole being a big kid at heart thing, right? Like there's just that part of it. And then other than that, like I just consume content like outside of B2B marketing, I guess. Like I watch like anime, play video games, make music, watch like Key and Peele and stuff, watch, Chappelle Show, all that stuff and his new stuff. So like I'm just, you're just consuming that type of media. And then again, when you have a deep understanding of your audience, you also have an understanding of their like type of humor, like I know that I could, again, like I know what I can get away with and I know what I can't, right? Like I don't feel like there's a whole very dark side of my humor that I haven't, like showed, because like it's like you have to know, right? Like I know my limits. And so I'm good at understanding my limits in terms of what I can get away with, what I can't get away with. And I operate within that realm. I don't go outside of it. And so sure, you can push the envelope, but like, again, like just because, for example, I might be into really crass, dark humor, I'm not going to expect my entire audience to be into that. Right. So I think it just really comes down to you leaning into, the kid at heart, you consuming different types of media, and you knowing your audience really well. And then, of course, this isn't my tip, but I totally agree with it. Doing things like improv class and, acting classes, drama classes, stuff like that. Like, I think that's one way to lean into it. And then last thing I would say is I like to think that I have very good taste. I like to think that I have a very good taste and good self-awareness in terms of I can watch something and be like, nah, this is so cringy. Like what the F was I thinking or something? Like I can just do that to myself, or when I'm thinking of an idea and I'll be like, no, that's stupid. Right? Like, how do I make this better? And so there is a part of me, like, I wouldn't say like I go hard on my ideas, but like I balance it out with being like my biggest fan, but also like my harshest critic. Like, like, so I'm a very big believer in like, no one wants to see bullshit. So like, I make sure that like what I'm putting out is like, just, like, I'm not just making stuff for the sake of making stuff. Like I know I know my audience, I know what they'll like. Just be silly, try new things, but then also like be real with yourself. Like, I don't know. We don't get participation points. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not actually like, like you get a giggle out of someone or whatever the case. That's why we have peers, right? Like I'll send my stuff to Todd. He sends his stuff to me. Like, what do you think? There have been a few times where he's like, this is not funny. Like, this is cringy as shit. And I'm just been like, okay, what's cringy about it? And then he'll tell me, and then I'll be like, all right, fine. And then I'll go and redo it or rewrite it. And I'll be like, what about this? And he'll be like, yeah, much better. And so it's okay to have those conversations. It's okay to just be honest with yourself if something is like sucks or not. And, you know, like, yeah, just improve, have that level of like self-awareness that like, okay, this is what I'm good at. These are the 4 things that I need to get better at. This is what I absolutely suck at. And then go and, you know, YouTube videos, articles, research those things, how to get better at those things. Right. Like, so I think our journey as a content creator, as a content marketer, like that's what it is. It's just this journey of getting better and learning more and applying our learnings. And so a part of that is self-awareness. Like, what do I know? What do I not know? And so, yeah, like if you're trying to be like the best athlete in the world or the best in the world at something, you have to have a great sense of like awareness and just like where you stand on all of the different things that make up your profession or your field or something like that. So my profession, my field as a marketer, it has certain areas that I believe that I've identified, and I've made it my journey to just consistently get better in these areas and just be real with myself on like how, you know, well I do that thing or how well I don't do that thing, and then attack it, you know, like learn more about it, improve. So, yeah, it's the same thing with, you know, edutainment. Consume a lot of it, see what, you know, the Todds and the Tims and the Travises and the Will Aitkins of our industry are cooking up. See what works from them, have conversations with them if you can. And then just try things. Like, you have to experiment, and you can't be afraid of like failing either. You know, like you're gonna like fail your way to success pretty much. Like, you're just gonna make a bunch of shit. Some of it's gonna work, some of it's not. And then the stuff that works, you're just gonna keep doing and improve on over time. The stuff that didn't work, you're gonna drop. And so like as an individual creator, like you can find your own thing. And there's a lot of things that you can adopt. Like, for example, like the quick recipe videos, like they blow up on YouTube Shorts. Like, I still don't understand why no one's done this yet. I can't cook, so that's why I haven't done it yet. But if I could cook, you would 1000% see LinkedIn content of me with like a voiceover talking about some marketing stuff, and I'm just like cooking up like a sick steak in like the dopest looking kitchen. And so it's just like a delivery mechanism, right? Like, it's just what you're doing is essentially presenting your insights. Like, that's all you're doing. And so like the way that you present your insights, it can change. Like, sometimes I could just open my webcam and be like, hey, what's up? These are my 5 content marketing ground rules. Rule number 1, right? I could just do that. Another time I could make like a funny skit about each of it. So like ultimately, it's like content creation just comes down to 2 things. Like, there's your substance, like what you're trying to communicate, like the insights you're providing, and then there's your delivery, like how are you presenting this information? And that's really all it comes down to. So yeah, man, sorry for rambling. I'm going to take the opportunity to stop.
So I guess obviously I think do you have any time limit or anything?
I mean,
already passed that.
Not really, but I do have to go pick up my kid from school in a little bit. If you have any more questions, though, we can cover like 1 or 2 more for sure.
Yeah, so that's one last question. So where is B2B marketing headed? Like, given all of this VC funding gone away, and it seems like from the P&L statement, they've taken the marketing expense out, like just thrown it out of the equation. Was marketing never relevant? Like, what is the thinking behind all of this?
I think there's just a lot of factors at play. I think COVID happened. I think evaluations blew up. I think we got a lot of funding. And for some reason, like, look, I'm relatively new to the SaaS space. I've only been a SaaS marketer for, I think, 3 years now. So, me just learning about this phenomenon like 3 years ago, like I'd see a LinkedIn post and it would be like Bumble just raised $60 million at a $900 billion valuation. And I'd just be like, what the fuck does that mean? And then like I'd go and look at it and then I'm just like, where did this number come from? Right? How did, it's because it's a multiple of revenue and their ARR and blah, blah. And I'm like, bullshit, still doesn't make sense. Right. So like this whole like thing, like this phenomenon of like, a company making $3 million a year, but then getting an evaluation of like $90 million and then being funded like $30 million. I just always thought it was the weirdest thing, right? Like it was weird. And so in a way, like that's just kind of gone away, like it's going away. And so in order to secure that funding now, like you actually have to show like sustainable, profitable growth, like 2x over time. I think like the standard formula is like triple, 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 double, double, right? But like if you look at a company like HockeyStack, it's been I don't know what, went from essentially zero to like almost mid 7 figures in like a year. You know what I mean? So that's way more than triple for the first year. So like that type of company with the engine that they've built, the content engine they've built, the sales process they've built, the insane product they've built, like this is the type of company that's going to, in my eyes, get that type of funding from here on out. So I think it all starts with this understanding of like, I have to prove something out, right? My budget at HockeyStack the whole time, like when I built the flow, me and Amir, it was just me and Amir, and we had a $3,000 per month budget, and we turned that into a $9 million pipeline driving media engine in 8 months on $3K a month. So like, I think it starts with this mindset of like, we're not getting free lunch anymore. I don't know why we were ever in the first place. So I think it's just like, hey, I have to prove something out. Like I have to have a theory. I have to have a sound action plan. I have to, like, again, what are my goals? What are my objectives? How do I do this? How do I start on a small scale? And then so I think it all starts with, think of it like you're a solo marketer and you've been told that you can grow a team, but like it's just you right now. Like the way that you build your team over time is that you have to get things going and established and set up and repeatable. And then you can have someone come in, hopefully, and then carry that thing forward for you, with you. So then you can establish more things, right? So like it all starts small. It all starts with something little that you're like growing over time. So like, I think that's where we're at, like most of us, we don't have massive budgets. We don't have all of this. So it's a matter of just like doing the mental gymnastics to figure out like, how does all this stuff work together, and luckily you have things like the easy mode framework that like walks you through it. And then, evolving on that, you have recently the presentation that Todd and I did at Golden Hour. That's not out as content yet. I think it'll be out as next week, but like there are these resources out there that show you. I think I've been like thinking about building a course, like a 0 to 1 million course for like solo marketers. So like there's information out there, and honestly, man, I think the biggest thing that we could do is just like stop giving a shit about like what people like me think and like what people like me are like telling you to do. I think so many marketers are at the point where they've consumed so much information over the years that they just need to like just act. Like I feel like most marketers are smart as hell. Most marketers know all of this. Like everything that I've talked about, I feel like so many marketers would have considered this. And the reason, you know, like if I said something that they heavily agree with is because they also believe in it. They've thought of it before. Either, you know, they're not in the spot where like leadership has enabled them to do these types of things or whatever. But I think the biggest thing that marketers could do is just stop caring about like what people who show up on podcasts and in your feeds and have 100 likes and whatever, like stop caring about what they think, because the biggest change that I made in my career was that I was always, you know, like the people that I learned from coming up as a marketer, you know, the HubSpot courses and, you know, the Moz blogs and the Whiteboard Fridays. And I cared so much about their opinions that whenever it was time for me to do something, I would always think from the perspective of how would they approach this thing, and never like fuck that. I know so much shit. Like this is how I'm going to approach it. Right. Like for example, that's where all of this stuff came from. Like, everything that I just talked about, like I didn't get this from a Moz blog. You know what I mean? Like at 2-3 years ago, I just abandoned all of that. I was like, I have questions that like none of these like entities or brands or people can answer, you know? And so I need to figure these things out myself. Like I just need to go my own little way. And so I think that's the biggest thing that you can do as a content marketer today, to like, just, you know, like level up your career, get shit done for your company, drive pipeline, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, I think that's, you know, yeah, pretty much it.
Okay, well, that was an awesome discussion. So again, thanks a lot for your time, and it was really good to have you here.
Sounds good. It was awesome meeting you and talking to you. I appreciate you taking the time out today. Thank you, Saad.
Yeah, no, it was real fun. It was real fun. So we'll stay connected. We keep in talk. Okay.
Sounds good. You take care. See you around.
Take care. Bye bye.